He woke to a ring that sounded like a line being drawn in the dark. Ethan Cole didn't startle, he surfaced. The voice on the encrypted line was steady and spare. An American consultant was being held against his will by an adversarial cartel in the mountains. No official footprint. Ethan would not exist on paper. Bring the man back. He said yes, the way a lock recognizes its key. The file arrived 10 minutes later, maps dusted with contour lines, a few grainy photos of trucks, an entry badge from a private clinic, and a portrait of the captive David Harris, thin, exhausted, eyes alive with stubborn focus. Ethan stood at the window while the kettle snapped toward a boil. The light outside was the pale gold that makes edges honest. He packed a small, exact bag, neutral clothes, a roll of tools, adhesive patches for skin comms, a compact jammer the size of a paperback, forged credentials that would survive a second glance, and cash folded so flat it behaved like paper. On the flight south, Colonel Mason didn't do ceremony. No official cover, no rescue team waiting behind the door. Blend in, read the system, stay 3 steps ahead. If you reach a safe handoff, we melt the sky for you. Until then, it's you. Ethan nodded, understood. The airstrip on the far side of the border was a smear of dust and heat. By afternoon, he was a stranger among fruit stalls and patched awnings, a man with a cap pulled low who asked about work and kept his answers short. He watched how a black pickup pressed silence into a street without revving the engine. He noticed which shopkeepers set tokens on their thresholds when certain men passed. An orange ribbon, a folded receipt, subtle lanterns that meant attention, deference, caution. The name Ortega floated through conversations like a current beneath the surface. Say it, and voices softened. Don't say it, and eyes moved to the ground. He didn't ask for introductions. He made himself useful. When a delivery truck stalled under the noon sun, he didn't posture. He rewired a frayed connection with the economy of someone who speaks machine. The engine returned to life. Nobody thanked him out loud, which suited him. By dusk, the story of a quiet fixer had moved the way stories do in towns. It found ears. 2 men with matching ink on their forearms found him the next morning. You make broken things run, one said. I listen until they tell me what they need, Ethan answered. They took him to a yard where dust settled on the shoulders of SUVs like gray cloth. He tuned an idling rhythm until it purred. He organized a shelf because chaos leaks time. He didn't volunteer a history. The yard boss, Morales, watched from the shade with the posture of someone who counts without moving his lips. Engines are easy, Morales said eventually. People are harder. Engines are honest, Ethan replied. People can be predictable. A courier brought a box of ledgers. Ethan asked to standardize the maintenance logs and was granted a flat nod that meant try. He didn't touch the numbers that weren't his to see. He made columns agree with themselves. He wrote small and clear. In the margins of supply manifests, he noticed faint triangles with a dot in the center, chalk marks, then pencil, always next to items that belonged to health. Sterile packs, compression wraps, gel coolers, nutrient bottles. A separate rhythm shadowed the main one. Same day each week, same destination code, same initials receiving. He followed the rhythm with his eyes and not his feet. The day the hatchback with the gray cooler rolled through the gate, the guard's clipboard didn't linger on the badge. The woman who stepped out was composed without being cold. Scarf tied simple, hands steady. Name Issa Valdez. She didn't look at Ethan because that is how you look when you want to see more than one thing at once. The cooler changed vehicles, the ledger changed lines. Ethan tightened a bolt that did not need tightening and let the puzzle mark itself in pencil. At night he walked a ridge path he'd chosen because it had 2 exits and a horizon he could read. Under a shoulder of stone he pressed a transmitter against the rock and spoke in the half sentences of a man who knows radios can be made to lie. Separate medical cadence. Weekly. Same driver. Same clinician. Route name Nublo. Patient likely monitored. Will confirm anonymously. He didn't wait for comfort. Comfort is a drug you can't afford when your heartbeat needs to count. He asked to reorganize emergency kits in the fleet, belts, lines, filters, coolant, and got a distracted wave that meant do your strange little order. He placed one air filter where he knew Santi, the driver assigned to the East Road, would reach for it. Beneath the paper lip of the filter, he hid the smallest part of a message. If you can read this, press your thumb once on the edge and return it under the dish bracket. If you cannot, leave it. If you need help, tap 3 short beats on metal when the truck stops. He did not watch anyone take the box. He made himself look like a man who minds his own tools. The truck left. Hours later, it returned. Grease marks told a different story than faces did. Ethan lifted the used filter as if judging where. Wedged along its frame lay a sliver of paper the size of a fingernail. He didn't open it until the evening light thinned the world to essentials. 3 words in block print. Alive. East. Waiting. He slept with his eyes closed and his mind open to a map. In the morning, he ran an errand to the repeater on the ridge with Santi, where the road bent after a lone pine. A low building sat almost shy of the trail. Its broom was still damp. A mug steamed, forgotten and yet remembered. A paperback dried on a sill where sun could reach it. On the way down, the door stood ajar by the width of a hand. He didn't check his watch. He was the watch. That night on the bridge, Issa lifted her gaze only when she had finished saying nothing. You're not who they think you are, she said. Neither are you, he answered. They keep him on a schedule. Hydration, nutrition, light, quiet. His mind is intact. Inside the outbuilding near the repeater. She didn't ask how he knew. 2 on rotation, 1 door, 1 window. I can get you in, briefly. Getting out will be different. It always is, he said. Mornings brought tests. The yard measured men the way a scale measures weight. Morales watched the way Ethan ignored noise. Ortega, when he finally appeared, had the unstartled calm of someone who has seen more moves than a board can hold. "You solve what is in front of you," Ortega said, almost as if it bored him. Useful. Ethan didn't try to perform loyalty. He did his work in a way that made the work want to be near him. When a convoy returned late and dusty, he didn't ask for stories. He ran his hands along a belt and said to a driver, "Shift earlier on the grade after kilometer 5. It will sound wrong and make everything right." People do not question sentences that ring like tools. Pressure arrived as it does. Sideways. A delivery stalled where it shouldn't. A schedule miscopied by a hand that never miscopies. A light in the office stayed on 2 hours longer. The air in rooms changed temperature when he entered. Morales started appearing in doorways for no reason that anyone admitted. Ortega stopped filling silence and started letting it grow. Ethan ran toward the weight instead of away. He volunteered to accompany a run that others avoided because the road had a memory. He asked to calibrate every tank and battery before nightfall. He requested a spare alternator for a truck that didn't need one yet. The request was granted because discipline looks like superstition until it saves you 10 minutes you can spend on a different kind of math. The night Issa drove him in as equipment help. She didn't make her voice urgent. Urgency gets doors closed. She made her voice like a list. The gate rolled aside. Inside the plateau, La Sombra revealed itself as a geometry study. Walls made to match the cliff, low angles that wrote themselves into wind, cables that hummed because cables hum. Ethan set the cooler on a workbench and spent the hours apprenticed to the soundscape, the 8-second cycle of a pump, the click from a cabinet without dust along its jamb, the way guard steps syncopated at shift change compared to midwatch. He did not announce that midnight is when clocks are most likely to lie. He let the hour find him. When the door to the interior building unlatched for that sliver between teams, he ghosted through the seam and closed it without a sound. The light inside was too clean to be kind. Harris sat on a cot with his hands in front of him, not for show. His beard was new and his eyes were old and both looked like him. Ethan didn't waste the first second. "I'm here for you," he said, voiced the volume of a thought. "Can you walk?" "Yes," Harris said, as if answering a different question. Ethan removed what needed removing with tools that do not sing, pressed a jammer against a seam to soften the teeth of alarms, and brought Harris to his feet with a grip that told truth. Steady, not urgent. Urgent, not reckless. They matched their steps to the generator's murmur. When the door opened again, the new team was already telling a joke that kept them from listening. Night favors the unremarkable. They didn't run. Running makes shapes that attract attention. They crossed to the garage at the pace of 2 men thinking about valves. The keys were where they always are when a system trusts itself too much. Ethan picked the second best truck because first choices glow. He turned the ignition the way you ask a favor of a friend you show up for. The engine answered with a hum that could have been any hum. They rolled across the yard without shouting their intentions. At the gate, the geometry tightened. He let the truck idle 3 meters back as if he were deciding whether to adjust a mirror. In the mirror, he read the pattern of hands. One on the panel, one lifting a cup, one gesturing. When the hand with the cup tipped back for a swallow and the panel hand moved to scratch an eyebrow, Ethan nudged the pedal with exactly the right persuasion. The truck slid through as if it belonged to the night. None of this was luck. He had rehearsed it with his body all afternoon. They did not crash through anything. They threaded. They followed a road they had already memorized down to the names of its pebbles. When light swept the cliff above them, Ethan used it as a metronome. Advance on the beat, pause in the shadow, breathe when the wind breathes. In the dry riverbed, the voice of Stone changed and he changed with it, keeping the truck's profile low, its sound lower. They abandoned the vehicle where an overhang folded into itself. On foot, Harris rediscovered what legs are for. Ethan matched his pace to lungs that had not been asked for this much air in too long. They drank water the way you drink when you want tomorrow. They didn't speak except when words save energy. Left, step, rest 60. Now, on the ridge, Ethan lifted a small beacon from beneath a loyal rock. He angled it toward a sky that understands signals and spoke into his palm. Package moving. Extraction needed. Quiet map 3. He didn't say names. He didn't need to. If Mason heard him, the world would tilt an inch in the right direction. Harris slept in stutters. Ethan watched the horizon with eyes that had learned time before they learned clocks. When dawn glazed the far slope, dust plumes braided the valley roads. The search was methodical because method is what holds power together. They stayed above it as long as possible, then slipped sideways where the ridge offered a seam. They crossed a ravine because its rocks marked the steps like notes. They used shade as if it were a tool. By late afternoon, a soft pulse answered from a cut in the plain, the return of his call. Not a siren, a heartbeat. He didn't point. He reoriented their bodies toward it. Harris, who had been economizing belief, allowed himself a smaller, stronger kind of hope. "We're close," he said, not as a question. "Closer than they are," Ethan said, which is the only measure that matters. The last kilometer was all edges, low scrub, the hush of hot air, the long patience of distance that refuses to shrink. Vehicles wheeled on the far side of the valley, tracing wide nets. Ethan timed their arcs and threaded between them. When one truck idled where it shouldn't, he paused with Harris behind a brush line until the engine note changed from listen to leave. He had taught entire teams to read sound. Tonight, all that teaching belonged to two people. Wind rose, and with it the deep thrum of rotors. The helicopter came in dark and angled, slow enough to be careful, fast enough to be decisive. It drew a stripe of air across the valley, and then lowered until the grass lay down like obedient hair. A door slid wide. A rope spilled. A figure inside wore the posture of a handshake Ethan had given 100 times without paperwork. Harris looked at Ethan, and Ethan looked at the line that meant up. Hands here, Ethan said, guiding, bracing, letting Harris feel exactly enough of his strength to borrow the rest. The ladder accepted them. Air accepted them. The door accepted them. Inside, the world narrowed to the volume of rotors, and the feel of metal, and the knowledge that below them geometry kept drawing lines that would not reach them in time. Harris closed his eyes only when his body told him it could. Ethan didn't close his. Mason leaned forward from a bench and didn't smile because smiling wastes breath when breathing matters. He said, "Welcome back," and managed to fill the words with everything they needed to hold. They climbed into cleaner air, arc by arc. The plateau folded itself back into anonymity. The road forgot the name he had given its stones. The ridge returned to being a ridge. The hatchback, the cooler, the chalk, the margins. Each detail slipped into the ledger of things that did their job and can now sleep. On the other side of the line, doors opened and hands that knew how to be gentle arrived in a practiced choreography. Harris left the rotor wash nestled in that choreography, his voice a cracked thank you that made no claims. Isa, elsewhere, stepped into a new name and a room with curtains that let in a better kind of light. Papers moved. Someone wrote a sentence that won't be printed, and someone else initialed it, and that is how quiet victories travel. Ethan declined a room and a debrief longer than necessary. He returned a borrowed badge and a tool that had saved him 6 minutes no one will count. He walked into First Light with a bag that weighed what it had weighed the morning. The ring drew a line in the dark. The sky looked like unpainted wood. Birds tested the air and kept it. He thought about engines that tell the truth if you let them, about chalk marks that become maps, about eyes that stay old and young at the same time when someone refuses to surrender their shape. He didn't call himself a legend. Legends are what other people do to a story when they want it to fit inside a single sentence. He preferred systems that work, plans that leave room for the unexpected, exits that are chosen instead of granted. If someone needed him again, a ring would find him because rings know where to go when people are not allowed to write addresses. He walked until walking turned into home. He set his bag down exactly where it had been. He sat without collapsing. He drank water as if it were more than water because sometimes it is. He looked at his hands and saw grease in the lines even though there wasn't any. He listened to the room saying nothing in a way that sounded like praise. Somewhere a file closed. Somewhere a road exhaled. Somewhere, in a part of the world where chalk can still be found on shelves, someone drew a small triangle with a dot in the center and smiled without explanation. He answered no questions because nobody asked. The clock on his wall made an honest sound. The horizon held its breath and then released it. The line that had woken him dissolved, which is what lines do when you step over them and keep going. He slept at last, the kind of sleep that arrives when a system resets. Morning would come, and with it, noise and quiet, and tools and maps and people who think engines are simple and people who think people are not. He would make the next broken thing run. If another ring came, he would pick it up on the first sound.